Imagine waking up one morning and realizing that every decision you've made, every friendship, every love, every success, every failure, was not shaped by your conscious will, but by something hidden, something you never wanted to face. A presence not outside of you, but within you, the darker half of yourself. The part you buried so deeply that even your closest friends would never suspect it was there. But what if that buried part, that unacknowledged shadow, has been the one making the real choices all along? You tell yourself you know who you are. You've built an identity, crafted a story about yourself, one that feels coherent and familiar. You know your likes, your dislikes, your values, your goals. But underneath this carefully curated image lies the shadow, the collection of impulses, fears, memories, and desires you deemed unacceptable and banished from sight. You think it disappeared. But nothing repressed truly dies. It waits. And while it waits, it grows clever, finding ways to seep into your life in subtle disguises. You pride yourself on being compassionate, yet there are moments you secretly feel envy. You see yourself as courageous, but there's a quiet, gnawing cowardice that makes you hesitate when no one is watching. You believe you're rational, yet in the privacy of your mind, irrational obsessions circle endlessly. And still, you convince yourself, that isn't me. That can't be me. But who is it then? Carl Jung once said, everyone carries a shadow, and the less it is embodied in the individual's conscious life, the blacker and denser it is. Imagine the weight of all those lessons you refused to learn because they were too uncomfortable, too ugly, too threatening to your image of yourself. The moments of rage you dismissed as just stress. The envy you buried under a forced smile. The self-hatred you numbed with distractions. Every refusal became a brick in the wall separating you from your own depths. And now you live inside that wall, wondering why life feels hollow, why patterns repeat, why freedom always feels just out of reach. What if the failures you keep encountering aren't accidents, but invitations from your shadow? What if the people you despise most are mirrors reflecting the traits you most fear in yourself? What if the very problems you try hardest to escape are secretly your teachers, harsh, cruel teachers, but teachers nonetheless? We don't like to think of ourselves as students of darkness. We chase the light, positivity, progress, self-improvement. We post affirmations and chase high vibes only, as though denying the shadow will somehow erase it. But every time you deny your darker truths, you are not erasing them, you are feeding them. Like a child abandoned, the shadow learns to scream louder, to twist itself into shapes that force your attention. Depression, anxiety, addiction, self-sabotage, broken relationships, repeated mistakes. Each one may be a shadow lesson knocking on the door you refuse to open. And yet, here lies the paradox. The very part of you that you fear the most may contain the wisdom you most desperately need. Jung did not see the shadow as merely destructive. He saw it as the wellspring of authenticity, creativity, and power, if only one dares to confront it. But confrontation is terrifying. Who willingly looks into the mirror that shows them not who they want to be, but who they truly are? Imagine you stand at that mirror right now. You see your face, but it flickers. Behind your smile lurks bitterness. Behind your confidence quivers insecurity. Behind your kindness hides selfishness. Do you look away, or do you stare until the mask cracks? What if the only way to truly live is not to polish your mask, but to break it? The question, then, is this: are the lessons you refuse to learn actually the key to becoming whole? Could it be that the very darkness you fear contains the missing half of your soul? You tell yourself you want freedom, truth, meaning. But can you have them if you refuse to face the parts of yourself that disgust you? Can you become who you are meant to be while pretending you are already complete? Or does wholeness demand that you walk into the abyss, that you sit with the monsters of your own making, and listen to what they have to say? The shadow is not a curse. It is an unanswered question. A question that lingers, waiting, whispering at the edges of your consciousness. The longer you ignore it, the louder it grows, until finally, you can no longer escape. So ask yourself now, what truths have you buried so deeply that even you don't dare name them? What lessons hide in your failures, your fears, your desires? What if the very thing you run from is the only thing that can save you? Because the shadow does not disappear. It waits for you. And the longer you refuse its lessons, the heavier the price becomes. You've felt its presence, haven't you? That unexplainable heaviness that sneaks into quiet moments, the voice that whispers, you are not who you pretend to be. Most people silence it quickly, scrolling through their phones, working longer hours, numbing themselves with entertainment or substances. Anything to avoid hearing the whisper. But silence does not kill it. In fact, every avoidance makes the shadow stronger, and this is where the hidden problem truly lies. The refusal to face oneself is the silent epidemic shaping human lives. Why do we run from ourselves? Why does the human mind exile its own truths? Psychology tells us that repression begins early. As children, we learn what earns love and what provokes rejection. A child who cries too much is told to toughen up. A child who shows anger is scolded, shamed, or punished. A child who expresses too much joy in the wrong context is told to calm down. Slowly, we begin to amputate parts of our authentic selves, discarding them into the dark. We trade honesty for survival. We learn that being loved requires not being fully ourselves. Thus, the shadow is born. But here is the paradox. The more you repress, the less you are you. You become a fractured version of yourself, a curated performance designed to meet expectations. You become a character in someone else's script. And the tragedy is that this performance eventually feels more real than the truth you buried. Carl Jung believed the shadow was not evil in itself. It became destructive only when ignored. When you deny anger, it festers into rage. When you suppress desire, it mutates into obsession. When you bury fear, it disguises itself as control, perfectionism, or cruelty. What you will not face will rule you from behind the curtain. Nietzsche warned of this very danger in his concept of ressentiment. He saw that those who repress their instincts often turn their buried frustrations outward, cloaking their bitterness in moral superiority. They convince themselves that their weakness is virtue, that their cowardice is kindness, that their envy is justice. And yet, beneath the facade, the shadow burns with resentment, quietly sabotaging every attempt at growth. Schopenhauer went deeper still, describing life as a ceaseless struggle of the will, an endless hunger, blind and irrational. He believed suffering was inevitable because desire itself is unquenchable. In this view, the shadow is not an accident but a structural feature of existence, the human being torn between what it wants and what it dares not admit it wants. And so we repress. But repression does not erase, it transforms. Modern psychology reveals that what we repress often leaks out through projection. You dislike arrogance in others, but is it arrogance you hate, or the parts of yourself that crave recognition? You condemn selfishness, but do you secretly long for the freedom to put yourself first? You mock people for being naive, but does their innocence remind you of the trust you lost? Think of the last time you judged someone intensely. Was it truly about them, or did they mirror back a trait you cannot accept in yourself? Projection is the shadow's favorite trick. It lets you fight your battles on the outside so you never have to look within. But this avoidance has consequences. Sartre spoke of bad faith, the human tendency to lie to oneself, to live inauthentically by denying one's freedom and responsibility. The shadow thrives in bad faith. You tell yourself you had no choice, that circumstances forced your hand, that others are to blame. You avoid the truth. You chose to remain blind because blindness was easier than honesty. And yet, even in this denial, the shadow is not merely destructive, it is pedagogical. Viktor Frankl, a man who endured the horror of concentration camps, observed that suffering carries meaning if we are willing to face it. Perhaps the same is true of the shadow. What if every suppressed fear and buried desire carries not just danger, but wisdom? Imagine the shadow as a dark library. Each book on its shelves contains a part of you, an impulse, a failure, a fear. You locked the doors long ago, but the library did not vanish. You think you've buried it well, don't you? The shadow, the impulses, the rage, the fear, the envy. You've hidden it under layers of politeness, productivity, distraction. You wear your curated identity like a suit of armor, convinced no one can see what lurks beneath. But repression is never silent. What you refuse to face does not vanish. It infiltrates your life in ways so subtle, so insidious, that you don't even recognize its fingerprints. Look closely at the patterns you cannot escape. The relationships that crumble in the same way every time. The dreams you almost achieve but sabotage at the last moment. The endless cycle of motivation followed by collapse. Are these coincidences? Or are they consequences? The shadow punishing your denial, orchestrating scenarios until you finally pay attention. Take, for instance, the person who prides themselves on being endlessly giving. They sacrifice, they accommodate, they serve. Yet beneath their generosity hides a buried resentment, a hunger for acknowledgement they never admit. Over time, that unspoken bitterness leaks out. They snap unexpectedly, withdraw suddenly, or manipulate through guilt. The shadow has turned their virtue into a weapon. Or consider the perfectionist. On the surface, they appear disciplined, reliable, hardworking. But beneath their flawless facade festers terror, the terror of being exposed as inadequate. Every achievement becomes hollow, every compliment dismissed, because nothing can silence the buried voice whispering, "You're not enough." Their shadow feeds on their ambition, transforming success into self-destruction. This is how the shadow works, quietly, invisibly, through the cracks of daily life. It hides in your slips of the tongue, your unexplainable overreactions, your irrational fears. It hides in the people you attract and the conflicts you repeat. It is the unseen author of your misfortunes, and until you confront it, you will keep rereading the same painful chapters. Modern psychology has mapped some of these tricks in the language of cognitive biases. Take confirmation bias, the tendency to see only what confirms your existing beliefs. The shadow loves this, because it ensures you'll never challenge the stories you tell yourself. You convince yourself that others are always the problem, that you are always the victim, that your failures were inevitable. And so the lesson goes unlearned. Then there is projection, perhaps the shadow's most elegant strategy. The traits you despise in others are often the very traits you refuse to see in yourself. You condemn someone as arrogant, but it is your own craving for recognition you deny. You despise someone's cowardice, but it mirrors the fear you suppress. Projection keeps the shadow invisible by disguising your inner battles as outer ones. And yet, projection has devastating consequences, not only for you but for the world around you. Wars have been fought because entire nations projected their shadows onto the enemy. Families have been destroyed because parents saw their own failures reflected in their children and punished them for it. Communities fracture when collective shadows are disowned, creating scapegoats to carry what no one dares to face. On a personal level, the cost is quieter but no less severe. Anxiety disorders often mask suppressed fear. Depression can be the weight of a shadow ignored for too long. Addiction is frequently an attempt to numb the pain of an unacknowledged wound. Self-sabotage, the phenomenon of undermining yourself just when success is near, is often the shadow's way of forcing you to confront what you've avoided. But here is the most unsettling truth. Sometimes the shadow does not sabotage you through failure, it sabotages you through success. You achieve the career, the wealth, the admiration. Outwardly, you seem complete. Inwardly, you are hollow. Why? Because your success was built on the mask, not the self. The shadow was never integrated, only buried deeper beneath achievement. This is why so many who have it all spiral into emptiness, despair, or destruction. The shadow does not care how high you climb, it will follow you to the summit and whisper, "This isn't real." Cultural conditioning amplifies this trap. We live in an era that rewards appearances. Productivity is mistaken for worth. Happiness is commodified as an aesthetic. Social media turns the mask into a marketplace. You are encouraged to polish your shadow into something relatable or inspirational, but never to face it directly. And so, generations grow more fractured, more anxious, more haunted, all while insisting they are fine. But the shadow's patience is infinite. It can wait years, even decades. It can linger in the background while you build your life, only to strike when you least expect it. In the breakdown you never saw coming, in the midlife crisis that shatters everything, in the sleepless nights when the whisper grows into a scream. By then, the consequences are not subtle. They are devastating. There comes a point when the cycle can no longer be endured. The repeated mistakes, the silent anxieties, the sabotaged opportunities, they pile up like rubble until you can no longer deny the truth. The life you're living is not free. The shadow has been calling the shots, and you've been its obedient puppet. But there is a moment, rare and terrifying, when a spark ignites inside you. A refusal, a rebellion, the recognition that the only way forward is not escape, not denial, but confrontation. Rebellion begins not with grand gestures, but with a single act of courage, honesty. Brutal, unflinching honesty. Imagine sitting in a silent room with nothing but yourself. No distractions, no phones, no excuses. Just you and the questions you've avoided for years. What do you truly envy? Whom do you secretly resent? What desires do you bury out of shame? What fears dictate your choices? This is where rebellion starts, not in conquering the world, but in daring to face your own reflection without flinching. But rebellion against the shadow is not about destruction. It is about integration. Jung spoke of the individuation process, the journey of becoming whole by reconciling the conscious and unconscious parts of the self. To rebel is not to kill the shadow, but to befriend it. To invite it into the light, not as an enemy but as a teacher. This is counterintuitive because everything in you screams, I must get rid of this darkness. Yet the paradox is that freedom lies not in rejection but in acceptance. Think of the myth of the hero. From Gilgamesh to Odysseus, from Buddha to Christ, every great story follows the same arc. The hero descends into darkness, confronts the monster, and emerges transformed. The monster is never truly slain. It is absorbed, its power claimed, its lesson learned. The rebellion is not against the existence of the shadow, but against your refusal to face it. But how do you do this in real life, not in myth? You begin by noticing the patterns. When you judge others harshly, pause and ask, what part of myself am I projecting? When you fail in the same way again, ask, what lesson am I refusing to learn? When anxiety grips you, ask, what truth am I running from? These questions are weapons in your rebellion, not because they give immediate answers, but because they pierce the armor of denial. Philosophy, too, offers a path. Nietzsche's challenge, become who you are, is not a call to create a mask, but to strip it away. To become who you are is to integrate the parts of yourself you've banished. Sartre's concept of freedom insists that you are never merely a victim of circumstance. You are always choosing, even when you choose denial. To embrace freedom is to take responsibility for your shadow, to admit, this darkness is mine, and I will face it. But rebellion is not only personal, it is cultural. In a world obsessed with appearances, choosing honesty is a radical act. When society demands you smile, to admit your despair is rebellion. When culture demands relentless productivity, to pause and listen inwardly is rebellion. When algorithms train you to seek validation, to sit alone with your pain and learn from it is rebellion. The shadow does not thrive in the light of honesty, but in the darkness of conformity. To rebel against it is to reject the script handed to you and write your own. History shows us examples of this rebellion. Think of Viktor Frankl, who, even in the nightmare of the concentration camps, refused to surrender his inner freedom. He saw suffering not as meaningless torment, but as a teacher of profound truth. Think of Martin Luther King Jr., who confronted not only societal shadows of racism and hatred but also his own fear of death, choosing courage over silence. Think of artists who dared to express the unspeakable, the poetry of Sylvia Plath, the paintings of Francis Bacon, the music of Johnny Cash. Each act of honesty was rebellion against the shadow of repression. But rebellion carries risk. The shadow does not surrender easily. The moment you turn toward it, it grows louder. Old fears resurface. Desires you thought were buried rise like ghosts. Imagine standing at the end of a long, dark corridor. Behind you are the echoes of every failure, every mistake, every secret you buried. Ahead of you is a single door. For years, you've avoided it, terrified of what waits on the other side. But now, after confronting the shadow, after peeling away the layers of denial and illusion, you realize, this door is not locked. It never was. The only barrier was your refusal to turn the handle. You open it, and what you discover is not the monster you expected, but something even more unsettling, yourself. Not the version of you that smiles for approval. Not the version of you that performs for safety. Not the fractured half-person trying desperately to maintain control. What you find is the whole of you, the light and the dark, the noble and the shameful, the beautiful and the grotesque. And for the first time, you understand, this was never about defeating the shadow. It was about embracing it. This is the ultimate truth. You are not only the parts of yourself you love. You are also the parts you hate, the ones you deny, the ones you call unworthy. To reject them is to reject yourself. To accept them is to become whole. The final, most powerful realization is paradoxical. The shadow was never your enemy. It was your lost twin, carrying the wisdom you were too afraid to claim. Every failure, every heartbreak, every cycle of sabotage was the shadow's way of teaching you what you refused to learn. It was never trying to destroy you. It was trying to complete you. Jung believed that wholeness, not perfection, is the goal of the human journey. Perfection is sterile, brittle, a mask destined to crack. Wholeness is messy, contradictory, alive. To be whole is to say, yes, I am kind, and I am cruel. I am brave, and I am terrified. I am selfish, and I am generous. To be whole is to live without splitting yourself into acceptable and unacceptable halves. It is to finally stop running. This truth is not easy to bear. It demands humility. It demands that you surrender the comforting lie that you are only good, only noble, only virtuous. But it also grants freedom, the kind of freedom that cannot be shaken by failure or loss. Because once you have embraced your shadow, what can the world take from you? They cannot expose what you have already owned. They cannot shame what you no longer deny. Consider the irony. The very traits you despised in yourself become sources of strength once integrated. Your anger, once suppressed, becomes the fuel for justice. Your envy becomes the recognition of what you truly desire. Your fear becomes wisdom that guides your courage. Nothing is wasted. Nothing is lost. The shadow transforms from saboteur to ally, from weight to wings. This is why Nietzsche spoke of amor fati, the love of fate. To embrace not only what is beautiful in life but also what is painful, ugly, and difficult. To say yes to the whole of existence, not just the parts you like. The ultimate rebellion is not against suffering, but against the refusal to learn from it. The ultimate freedom is not to erase the shadow, but to love it as your teacher. And in this love, something extraordinary happens. Life no longer feels like a series of random torments. Every challenge becomes meaningful. Every wound becomes a lesson. Every fear becomes a doorway. You no longer ask, why me? Instead, you ask, what is this trying to teach me? The truth is not that the shadow disappears. It will always be with you. But instead of hiding in the dark, it walks beside you, whispering truths you once could not bear to hear. You carry it with dignity, like a scar that no longer bleeds but reminds you of your survival. And when you reach this point, you realize something profound. The shadow was never outside the journey. It was the journey. The lessons you refused to learn were the very lessons that shaped your becoming. The darkness you feared was the crucible that gave birth to your strength. So what now? What do you do with this realization? You live. But you live differently. You stop pretending. You stop splitting yourself into halves. You allow yourself to be flawed, to be contradictory, to be human. And in this humanity, you discover a power greater than perfection, authenticity. You no longer chase meaning outside yourself. You create it by living fully, with all your light and darkness intact. You no longer wait for the world to validate you. You validate yourself by embracing every part of your being. You no longer fear the cycles of failure, because you understand now, every cycle is a lesson, every fall is an initiation, every shadow is a guide. The ultimate truth is not that you must become someone new. It is that you must finally become who you already are. The shadow was never an intruder. It was the half of you you abandoned. And now, in embracing it, you are no longer half alive. You are whole. And so the corridor ends, but the journey does not. Because life will continue to throw shadows in your path. But now you will not run. You will not deny. You will not pretend. You will walk forward, light and shadow side by side, no longer fractured but complete. This is the final lesson. The one you resisted. The one you feared. The one you now carry like a flame. The shadow is not your enemy. The shadow is you. And to embrace it is to finally come home.